My stepmom screamed, "Leave my house." My dad didn't say a word, and my aunt opened her door to me. I want to share what happened next, so pay close attention, and if it moves you, show some love by liking and sharing this story. I had just returned from school, tired and carrying my books, when the shouting started. I froze in the doorway as Kemi, my stepmom, pointed at me with fire in her eyes. I didn't understand what I had done. "Leave my house, Zola," she yelled. My heart sank, and I turned to my dad, hoping for some protection. But Tejas stood there, silent, his face blank. He didn't even look at me. That silence cut deeper than any words. I felt completely alone in the house I had called home all my life. I gathered my courage and tried to speak, to ask what I had done wrong, but Kemi waved me off angrily. Tay still didn't intervene. Every word from her felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I realized then that I couldn't count on him to defend me. My anger and hurt mixed into a heavy weight inside me. I wanted to cry, to scream, but I had to stay strong. Without giving me a chance to explain, Kemi pushed me toward the door. I walked out, carrying my confusion, hurt, and a growing fire in my heart. I had nowhere to go until I remembered my Aunt Neka. She had always been my safe place whenever life became too much. I walked to her house, each step heavy with the pain of rejection, but also a flicker of hope. When Neka opened the door, she hugged me tightly, letting me feel a warmth I had missed for so long. Her home felt like a shield against the storm I had just left. That night, as I sat in her living room, I replayed the moment over and over in my mind. How could my father just stand there and let her treat me like that? How could Kemi be so cruel, so determined to push me away from the family I loved? Tears came, but they were different. They weren't just for sadness. They were for the injustice I had faced. I realized I had to be stronger than my circumstances. I couldn't let their cruelty define me. I made a silent promise to myself that night. I would not stay a victim. I would find a way to reclaim my life, to show them that I deserved respect and dignity. I didn't know how yet, but I could feel the fire growing inside me, a determination to rise above betrayal and hurt. My journey was just beginning, and though I had been pushed away, I knew this was the moment I started taking control of my story. I looked around at Neka's home, feeling safe for the first time in hours, and whispered to myself that I wouldn't let anyone break me. Not Kemi. Not my father. Not anyone. This was my life, and I was ready to fight for it. I stepped into Aunt Neka's house feeling a mix of relief and embarrassment. It wasn't easy admitting that I had been sent away from my own home, but her warm smile and open arms made the shame a little lighter. The living room smelled like freshly cooked food and lavender, a comfort I hadn't realized I needed until that moment. Sitting there, I finally let myself breathe, though the ache from my father's silence still lingered. Aunt Neka poured me a cup of tea and sat down beside me. She didn't rush to ask questions, just let me sip in silence for a while. Then she began to tell stories about our family, stories of women who had faced betrayal, hardship, and yet had found ways to survive and thrive. She spoke of resilience like it was a gift we carried in our blood, of strength built from challenges rather than the absence of them. I listened captivated, feeling small yet inspired. For the first time in hours, I felt a spark of hope. While I tried to settle in, I couldn't stop thinking about my dad. I remembered little things I had brushed off before. How he laughed a little too warmly at Kemi's jokes, how he seemed to step aside whenever she spoke. At first, I tried to dismiss it as normal, but now it felt different. It felt like favoritism, a quiet preference for someone who had hurt me deeply. That thought made my chest tighten, and a dull anger started bubbling inside me. I realized how alone I had been in my own home, abandoned not just by a stepmother, but by my father's unwillingness to stand up for me. Days passed, and I began to adjust to Neka's home. The safety it offered was comforting, but the thought of my father's silence kept me on edge. I started noticing patterns, little signs of how Kemi had gained influence over him. Each observation added fuel to the fire inside me. I didn't want to be a powerless victim anymore. The embarrassment of having to leave my home shifted into determination. I began thinking carefully, imagining ways to prove my worth, to show that I was strong, intelligent, and capable. I spent quiet nights making mental notes of what I could do, learning from my aunt's stories and my own observations. I didn't know the full plan yet, but I felt the first stirrings of strategy. I would need patience, courage, and cunning to reclaim what I had lost, but I could already feel myself preparing. My heart was heavy with the hurt of abandonment, yet it beat with a new rhythm, a rhythm that refused to be silenced by cruelty. By the end of my first week at Neka's, I had decided that I wouldn't let anyone's favoritism, manipulation, or betrayal define me. I was determined to rise above it. Sitting by the window one evening, watching the sun dip behind the trees, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would prove my strength, and I would take back my dignity, no matter how long it took. While unpacking some of my old things at Aunt Neka's house, I stumbled upon a stack of letters and emails hidden in a drawer I had never noticed before. Curiosity pushed me to open them, and as I read, my stomach sank. The messages weren't ordinary. They hinted that my father, Tay, had known about Kemi's manipulations all along. Every sly remark, every unfair punishment, every subtle humiliation, I realized none of it had been unknown to him. My anger flared hotter than I had expected. Memories began to flood back, sharp and vivid. I remembered the time Kemi accidentally spilled juice on my school uniform and laughed when I panicked about cleaning it before my class. I remembered the dinner when she criticized my choice of friends in front of my father, making me feel small, and how Tay had just nodded along silently. I thought of the countless other moments when her words and actions were designed to make me doubt myself, to isolate me, to control me. And my father had watched it all, saying nothing. The more I thought about it, the more my chest burned with betrayal. The seeds of revenge, tiny and fragile at first, began to grow in my mind. I wasn't just hurt, I was determined. I couldn't ignore the injustice anymore. I needed to act, but I also knew I had to be careful. Acting too quickly could backfire. I needed a plan, patience, and precision. That evening, I shared my discovery with Aunt Neka. She listened quietly, letting me pour out all my frustration and disbelief. When I finally paused, she placed her hand over mine and spoke softly but firmly. Zola, anger alone won't help you. You must be smart. Let it fuel your strategy, not your recklessness. Watch, wait, and gather everything you need to show the truth clearly. Don't rush. Your power lies in patience. Her words, calm yet firm, grounded me. They reminded me that while my emotions were real, they could also be my greatest tool if I used them wisely. That night, I took out a notebook and began writing. I listed every moment of injustice I could remember. Every time Kemi had undermined me, humiliated me, or manipulated situations to her favor. I included dates, details, and even the reactions of those around us. This list became my secret blueprint. Not just a record of wrongs, but the foundation of my plan to reclaim my dignity. As I wrote, I felt a strange sense of control return. For the first time since Kemi had shouted at me and my father had done nothing, I felt the beginnings of power. The betrayal that had once left me crushed now sparked determination. I knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. Every injustice, every secret my father had ignored, was now a step toward justice. And deep down, I promised myself that I would not let anyone underestimate me again. I spent days quietly observing Kemi, paying attention to everything she did and said, until I began noticing patterns in her behavior. She was always careful around her friends and colleagues, but there were small cracks. Moments when she let something slip, a secret about her business dealings, hints of unethical shortcuts, things that could get her into serious trouble if anyone found out. My heart raced as I realized how much I had discovered. For the first time, I felt the rush of knowing I held power she didn't even suspect. I knew I couldn't act openly, not yet. Kemi was cunning, and any obvious move could backfire. So I worked silently, gathering details and organizing the information I had. I wrote everything down, double-checked facts, and made sure I had evidence that would be credible. Then, carefully and anonymously, I contacted a few key authorities and business associates connected to her work. I didn't sign my name. I just presented the facts, letting them connect the dots themselves. My hands shook when I sent the first messages, but a sense of satisfaction spread through me. Within days, I began to notice changes in Kemi's behavior. She was no longer as confident as before. She double-checked everything, questioned people around her, and her sharp tone toward me increased, though she didn't know why. She glared at me during family gatherings, and her laughter felt forced. She was suspicious and paranoid, constantly looking over her shoulder, unsure of who might be watching. Seeing her like this gave me a strange sense of satisfaction, a taste of control that I had never felt before. I also noticed a strange lightness inside myself. For the first time, I felt that I wasn't completely helpless, that I could influence events in my own favor. It was intoxicating, the feeling that I had turned the tables, even in a small way. The anger and frustration I had carried for so long transformed into energy I could channel, a quiet power I hadn't realized I possessed. Meanwhile, my father, Tay, continued to remain oblivious. He didn't notice the tension growing around Kemi or the change in her demeanor. He laughed, joked, and acted as if nothing had happened, completely unaware that I had already begun taking action. His inaction only fueled my resentment further. How could he continue to turn a blind eye to her manipulations and the chaos she caused? His ignorance was a reminder that I couldn't rely on anyone to fix things for me. I had to rely on myself. Sitting quietly in Aunt Neka's house one evening, I thought about what I had done and what I could do next. I felt a surge of confidence and determination. This first act of revenge was small, but it was mine. It was proof that I could take control, that I could fight back. I realized then that this was only the beginning. Kemi's manipulations had underestimated me, and now I had found the courage and cunning to challenge her. My journey toward reclaiming my life had officially begun, and for the first time, I felt like I could win. I decided it was time to reconnect with my dad, even though the memory of his silence still stung. I knew I couldn't confront him angrily. It would only push him further into Kemi's control. Instead, I approached him gently, showing him my vulnerability. I let him see my hurt, the tears I had held back, the frustration of being pushed away from my own home. I spoke softly about how lost I felt and how much I wished he had stood up for me. I watched his face closely, searching for any flicker of recognition, any sign that he was beginning to feel the weight of what had happened. At first, he listened quietly, nodding but saying very little. I didn't need words. I needed his awareness. I shared small, subtle details about Kemi's behavior, not as accusations, but as observations. How her words often seemed designed to humiliate me, how she subtly influenced decisions in ways that weren't fair. I watched him carefully, gauging his reactions. His eyebrows would furrow, his eyes would linger on mine, and I could tell he was beginning to question things he had never questioned before. I also made sure to express appreciation for the little things he had done, creating a contrast between his occasional kindness and the constant manipulations I endured. I wanted him to reflect, to notice the imbalance, to feel the cracks in Kemi's carefully constructed facade. Sometimes, I would mention small victories or moments of pride I had achieved, subtly reminding him of who I was beyond her interference. Each word, each glance, each pause was deliberate. I wasn't revealing my full plan. I didn't need to. All I needed was to plant seeds of doubt in his mind. It worked slowly but surely. Tay began to notice changes in Kemi's behavior that he had overlooked before. He saw her impatience, her quickness to anger, the way she sometimes twisted facts to her advantage. He seemed conflicted, unsure of how to respond. I watched him wrestle with the realization that perhaps he had been blind to her intentions, that he had allowed her to gain influence at the expense of his own daughter. I didn't push him further. I let him come to those conclusions himself. As days passed, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I realized I could influence my father without laying all my cards on the table. I could guide him to see the truth without forcing him, and in doing so, I strengthened my own position. He was beginning to question Kemi, and that was enough for now. I didn't need confrontation. I needed reflection, and I had successfully nudged him toward it. Sitting alone in my room later that evening, I felt a sense of empowerment. I was no longer powerless in the dynamics of my own family. By understanding my father's emotions and using them subtly, I had found a way to shape events quietly. I was learning that influence could be just as powerful as direct action, and with patience, I could turn even the silence of my father into an ally in my plan. I met Chaik Obi by accident one afternoon when he stopped by Aunt Neka's house. He had always been close to our family, someone who had known me since I was little, but I never expected him to become involved in what I was dealing with. He asked casually how I was doing, and something in his voice, gentle but direct, made me open up more than I intended. When I mentioned Kemi's behavior, his expression changed. He didn't look surprised. Instead, he looked as if he had been waiting for someone to finally say it out loud. "Zola," he said quietly, "you're not imagining things. Kemi has been pulling strings for a long time." His words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time, someone outside my home confirmed what I had felt for years. That moment built an instant trust between us. He told me he had seen how she treated people, how she twisted stories and created drama to control situations. He never liked it, but had kept his distance out of respect for my father. Now, knowing what she had done to me, he seemed ready to help. We started meeting secretly, sometimes at Aunt Neka's kitchen table, sometimes during short walks outside. He helped me gather information, little things he had witnessed, conversations he had overheard, and inconsistencies he had noticed in her stories. I added everything to the notebook I had already started. Together, we built a clearer picture of Kemi's manipulations, connecting pieces I hadn't been able to understand alone. With every new detail, my resolve sharpened. I started planning carefully, step by step, imagining how to expose her without making myself vulnerable. Chaik understood strategy well. He wasn't impulsive, and he encouraged me to think before acting. We talked through every idea, considering how Kemi might respond and what consequences could follow. Slowly, a real plan began to take shape, a series of moves that could reveal her true nature to everyone around us. Meanwhile, Aunt Neka watched everything with calm awareness. She didn't interfere, but she offered steady moral support whenever I needed it. Sometimes she shared advice about patience, reminding me that rushing would only strengthen my enemy. Other times she simply sat with me, letting me talk through my fears. Her presence was a constant reminder that I wasn't alone anymore, and that gave me strength I had never felt before. As all this unfolded, Kemi's behavior began to shift. She became more controlling, more sharp-tongued, and more aggressive. It was as if she sensed something slipping out of her grip, though she didn't know what. She questioned everything, even small details, watching people closely as though searching for threats. The tension around her grew thicker each day. But instead of scaring me, her intensity only pushed me further. Her fear confirmed that she was vulnerable, and her aggression showed she wasn't as untouchable as she pretended to be. With Chaik gathering information beside me and Aunt Neka strengthening my spirit, I felt more prepared than ever. I knew the real fight hadn't started yet, but I was ready. I knew that if I wanted people to finally see who Kemi truly was, I couldn't expose her directly. She was too clever, too practiced at pretending. Instead, I had to create moments where her mask would slip on its own. So I started quietly setting up situations, small ones at first, where her real personality would come out without me saying a word. I began with things I knew bothered her. She hated when people questioned her decisions, even gently. So at a small family gathering, I asked an innocent-sounding question about one of her business choices, making sure others were around to hear. Her smile tightened, and she snapped back at me with irritation she couldn't hide. Everyone fell silent, surprised by her tone. I said nothing, just let the moment linger. It was the beginning of something bigger. Next, I used what I had learned about her at work. Kemi liked to appear in control, but she struggled when things didn't go exactly her way. I made sure that one of her colleagues received a piece of information she had been hiding. Nothing harmful, but enough to put her under pressure. When she confronted me later, her voice was sharp and panicked. She accused me of things I hadn't even done, revealing her insecurity in front of people she had always tried to impress. Again, I stayed calm. The more composed I was, the more chaotic she became. Kemi started watching me more closely, her eyes narrowing whenever I entered a room. I could feel her suspicion growing, but she didn't know what I was capable of. She still thought of me as the quiet girl she could push around, not realizing how much I had learned or how much support I now had. That underestimation became my greatest weapon. The more she doubted me, the easier it was to guide her into traps she didn't see coming. My dad, Tay, began noticing things too. He saw Kemi's sharp tone, the tension in her posture, the way she snapped at small things. Sometimes he would glance at me with confusion, as if trying to understand what had changed. He looked torn, caught between his loyalty to her and the growing fear that something wasn't right. But he still didn't speak up, and that silence only pushed me further to continue what I had started. With each situation I orchestrated, my confidence grew. I realized I didn't need to confront Kemi loudly or publicly. I could let her destroy herself by reacting to pressures she couldn't control. And every time she slipped, every time she revealed a piece of her true nature, I felt myself getting one step closer to my goal. By the end of the week, I could tell she was unraveling. Her voice shook, her decisions became frantic, and the people around her were starting to notice. I didn't have to say anything. They were seeing it for themselves. And as I watched her struggle to hold on to her image, I felt a calm, steady power rising inside me. My trap was working. And this time I wasn't afraid. I knew the time was coming when Kemi wouldn't be able to hide behind her smiles and polite lies anymore. Everything I had gathered, every moment she slipped, every witness who had begun to see her true nature, I was ready to bring it all together. But I didn't want a loud fight. I wanted a controlled confrontation, one where her own actions would betray her. So I arranged for a small gathering at Aunt Neka's house, inviting a few close relatives and family friends, including people who had started noticing Kemi's odd behavior. I made sure Kemi believed the gathering was something simple, a casual family discussion about improving communication. She liked anything that made her seem important, so she agreed to attend. As soon as she walked in, I could see her surprise at who was present. She gave a tight smile, clearly uneasy but trying hard to appear confident. I began gently, speaking calmly about recent misunderstandings and concerns. Then I laid out the first piece of truth, something small but undeniable, a lie she had told about me that everyone could verify. She immediately tried to dismiss it, laughing it off as a miscommunication, but the room stayed quiet. I watched her eyes dart around, searching for support. Then I brought up another lie, this time something she had said to one of her own colleagues. Chike stepped forward and confirmed it. Kemi's face tightened with anger. She tried to twist the story, claiming people were misremembering or exaggerating. When I showed a printed message that contradicted her words, her denial became frantic. She turned to my father, insisting I was manipulating everyone. Tay looked shaken, his eyes moving between the evidence and Kemi's defensive outbursts. For the first time, he couldn't hide behind silence. He saw how desperate she sounded, how her story kept changing, how the tension she carried had been building for weeks. I watched his shoulders drop as the weight of his own inaction hit him. He realized he had ignored signs that were now impossible to avoid. Kemi's voice rose, sharp and trembling. She accused me of lying, twisted my words, and tried to make it seem like I was imagining everything. It was classic gaslighting, her last attempt to regain control. But this time, I didn't waver. I stayed calm, answering her accusations with clear explanations and logic. I didn't shout or cry. I didn't let her emotional chaos pull me in. I had the truth, and I had people who had seen enough to believe me. Aunt Neka stood at my side, steady as ever, while Chike added details whenever Kemi tried to bend the narrative. The more she fought, the more everyone saw the truth. Her mask was crumbling, and she couldn't stop it. As the confrontation reached its peak, Kemi's voice cracked. She looked around the room and found no support, not even from Tay. Her confidence faltered for the first time. And in that moment, I felt the shift. This wasn't just about exposing her. It was about reclaiming my place, my voice, my dignity. The final confrontation was coming. And this time, she wouldn't be the one in control. Zola had always suspected that Kemi's cruelty ran deeper than the daily insults and quiet manipulations. But nothing prepared her for the truth she uncovered. While reviewing old documents and digging through forgotten digital files, she stumbled upon a pattern: emails to school administrators sent under her name, withdrawal forms she never signed, and financial requests diverted to accounts she didn't recognize. At first she thought it was a coincidence, but the deeper she looked, the more undeniable it became. Kemi had been sabotaging her for years. She found evidence of emails sent to her dream universities claiming she was no longer interested in admission. Messages that painted her as unreliable or unprepared. There were bank statements showing scholarship funds redirected into an account linked to Kemi's side business. Even more painful were the text messages exchanged between Kemi and distant relatives. Carefully crafted lies that portrayed Zola as disrespectful, ungrateful, and untrustworthy. Every family bond Zola had struggled to maintain had been poisoned by Kemi's hands. For a long moment, Zola sat still, unable to breathe. The betrayal pulsed like a physical wound. This wasn't just manipulation. This was the destruction of her future, her independence, her relationships, done quietly, calculatingly, and without remorse. But instead of breaking her, the truth solidified her resolve. She wouldn't confront Kemi with rage. She would confront her with facts so irrefutable that even Kemi's silver tongue couldn't twist them. Methodically, Zola compiled everything: emails, timestamps, bank transfers, call logs, screen recordings. Every piece of sabotage was arranged in a clean, chronological file. She made backups, then backed up the backups. She wanted no room for denial, no space for manipulation. When the moment finally came, she called a family meeting. Relatives who had been distant arrived reluctantly, still carrying traces of the lies they'd been told. Tay sat at the center, tense, confused, and already ashamed without knowing why. Zola presented the evidence calmly, each revelation landing with the weight of years stolen from her. Gasps filled the room. Faces shifted from doubt to horror. Kemi's composure cracked instantly. She tried to spin excuses, reaching for outrage, claiming forgery, insisting Zola was framing her. But the evidence was too thorough, too consistent, too damning. Tay's face drained of color as he realized how deeply he had failed his daughter. He didn't speak at first. He simply stared at the proof of his silence, his complicity, and his blind trust in the woman who had dismantled his child's life one opportunity at a time. The guilt washed over him with crushing force. Zola didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her victory wasn't in humiliating Kemi. It was in reclaiming what had been stolen. Her dignity, her voice, her truth. By the end of the confrontation, Kemi found herself completely isolated. No one defended her. No one offered sympathy. The web she had spun for years collapsed around her, leaving her exposed and alone. For the first time, the family circle closed, without her. Zola finally felt the peace of a battle fought with clarity and won with evidence, not vengeance. Zola stood in the quiet of her room, the same room where she had once cried herself to sleep, feeling trapped beneath the weight of Kemi's manipulations. But now the silence felt different, lighter, almost sacred. She finally allowed herself to breathe, not as a victim clawing for space, but as a woman who had fought her way out of darkness and reclaimed her identity. She reflected on the long path she had taken, from being unheard and underestimated to becoming the calm architect of her own justice. What once felt like helplessness had transformed into a steady, grounding power within her. Aunt Neka became her anchor through it all. Their bond was now unshakable, forged in truth and loyalty. The warmth of her aunt's presence, her gentle voice, her unwavering faith, felt like a blessing Zola had overlooked for too long. Even Chaik and the few allies who had stood beside her became part of a newfound circle of support. For the first time in years, Zola realized she wasn't alone. She had people who saw her, believed her, and fought with her when it mattered. Tay approached her quietly one afternoon, shoulders stooped, guilt weighing heavily on his expression. He didn't try to justify anything or sweep the past aside. Instead, he admitted every mistake, his silence, his blindness, his failure to protect her. The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. He promised to do better, to earn her trust back rather than assume it. Zola didn't forgive him instantly, but she accepted the sincerity in his words. Healing would take time, but at least the door to reconciliation had finally been opened. That, in itself, was progress. With the chaos settling, Zola began to think about her own future, one that was no longer controlled or sabotaged by someone else's insecurities. She revisited her academic goals, revived old passions, and explored opportunities she had once believed were out of reach. Her confidence grew with every plan she made, every step she took toward rebuilding the life she deserved. The woman staring back at her in the mirror looked stronger, steadier, and far more self-aware than the version of herself she had been months before. Justice, in its quiet way, had been served. Kemi's downfall echoed through the family and community, her influence diminished and her manipulations exposed beyond repair. There was a collective understanding that her actions were inexcusable, and she was left to face the consequences of her own choices. Still, a faint chill lingered in the air whenever her name was mentioned, a reminder that betrayal leaves scars, even after the wounds have healed. But Zola walked forward with her head high, knowing she had faced every storm and survived. She had uncovered the truth, reclaimed her voice, and restored her dignity. The lingering tension didn't frighten her anymore. If anything, it reminded her of how far she'd come, and how unstoppable she had become. Do you think Zola was right to step away and rebuild her life on her own terms? Or should she have given her father and stepmother more chances before fighting back? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to hear your view. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss another one.